So let's get it's 7:04. Let's get going. So this is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting for January 25th, 2023. So I will declare the meeting open. I'll read through the agenda and then see if anybody has any changes to that, and then we advisory members can vote to either approve the agenda or any changes that we might make to it. So we'll start in our usual way with liaison reports. Then we'll get to doing budget review for departments tonight, which includes inspection, Conservation Commission, Sustainability, Planning Board, and Board of Health. And then we'll approve minutes, and that should be it. Let me just mention for people presenting tonight, I was inclined to just do this in the order that it's on the agenda. But if anybody has a reason for wanting to switch that, we can easily switch that if somebody needs to get off a little bit earlier and would prefer to shift the timing. So anybody have any items that we should add to the agenda or any changes to the agenda? So let's do just a quick roll call to approve the agenda then as posted. So Natalie, let's start with you. Actually, I guess I should entertain a motion first.
I move to approve the agenda. Natalie Weir, aye.
And second?
Second.
Perfect. So Natalie was aye. Nora?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Jane? And I could read lips, but couldn't hear you, Jane. You're not muted, but something with your mic or something. There we go. Yes, okay. That's great. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we're set on that. So let's start with any liaison reports. I have just one very quick one to mention. At our meeting, just kind of a brief, kind of trivial follow-up, but at our meeting some weeks ago, when we considered the advisory budget, we zeroed out the postage line with the understanding that that was just going to run through the town's postal meter, and that would show up in a different budget. Actually, it turns out that it's meant to show up in advisory's budget. So just a heads up that the somewhat less than $1,000 of postage for advisory is going to come back into advisory's budget. So just wanted to mention that so that there's an official record that that change was made. Anybody else with liaison reports? Any other advisory members?
A capital budget committee met last night to review DPW. And so we're trying to get all of the capital requests in before they come to advisory. And I think we're on track to achieve that.
I think we talked to DPW on advisory next week. How did that conversation go? Anything that would be helpful to pass on to the rest of the committee?
It was a very good discussion. Roads, buildings, and then DPW. No equipment this year, which is a change. And then a good discussion ensued about capital versus operating budget and the difference, and then exempt capital versus non-exempt capital requests. And again, these are all the tools, as many of you know, that we have at our disposal to influence the tax rate each year. So that conversation came up, and we addressed it as tools we have to influence the tax rate on behalf of all of the taxpayers.
Peter,
all right.
Reject.
Go ahead, Nora.
Of course.
Please.
Okay, thank you. One thing that I thought was interesting that is coming up is and correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, for the roads and maintenance and keeping up with the roads, repaving and whatnot, For example, Woodland and Goulding was about $1 million. And how that's in the capital budget versus the operating budget versus, them putting it under a 10-year bond and floating it. And the subject did come up, whether you move something like that into operating budget, which seems more, if that's going to come up every year, budgeting out so a big dollar amount. Was it $250 a year that he kind of had in there, Peter?
For roads, yes,
Right.
his road committee. Yeah.
And where is it now?
Where is what?
The paving the roads is in what budget now?
It's under capital as opposed to operating. And I guess from what, and I'm new, so from what I heard is that it's something that probably was done about 20 years ago. Peter, you can correct me if I'm not getting this right, but.
Well, roads fit the classic definition of capital with a lifetime of over 3 years and $10,000 this year, $25,000 next year. So it made sense there. It was, I think the discussion always comes up with buildings when we capitalize projects for buildings. Should that be in operating maintenance versus floating a bond and paying it over the life of the project? But roads, definitely, you don't, in my humble opinion, you don't want to assess the current tax base for $1 million road that the benefit accrues to all that drive on that road for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that's the benefit of a bond, a municipal bond, is that you can spread that cost over current and future taxpayers for the benefit of that road.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Nora. I was just going to add a quick comment on that. So I've heard some talk about the same issue. And Peter, I agree with you for $1 million road that, makes perfect sense for that to be capital. I could imagine there's some issues that fall into a bit of a gray area that are more like maintenance. And then we could think about whether maintenance ought to be counting as a capital expense or that's just an ongoing operating budget expense. Not sure what the right answer is, but it sounds like that conversation started last night and no doubt we'll get a chance to continue it next week. I think there's also this interesting interaction given what I think next year is going to be the possibility of the town needing an override for the operating budget, of how any changes in our accounting procedures might interact with that, and that we just want to be thoughtful about the timing with if we decided there was some change to make, to not do it in a year or it was going to interact in a complicated way with other Prop 2.5 kinds of constraints on the budget. So I just toss that out because those are ideas related to what Peter, you and Nora, what you both talked about that might also be relevant. And as I said, I think we'll get a chance to dig into this some next week when we cover some of the same ground with Sean.
Now, for an override for next year, and I know that was probably the result of the 5-year projections that you presented, is it a permanent override, a temporary override?
I think that's all in the realm of the completely unknown, right? So first off, we haven't even gotten through this budget year. So the point of that exercise was just to highlight that we may be getting close to those limits. And I think the town will have some hard decisions to make about how to manage that. And there are a number of, as you just suggested, Peter, there are a number of different ways that could be managed. But I think it'd be wildly premature for me to even offer, a perspective on that, because I just think we don't know at this point. That's just it's in the future, but it's a challenge that we may all have to face next year. Except for those of you who cycle off the committee just in time, so you can say, "Hey, when I was on the committee, this never came up." It's the new management that messed this all up. Okay, so that being said, any other liaison reports or anything anybody else had to share before we get to budget reviews? Okay, great. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Nora. So, all right. So I didn't hear anything about anyone who wanted to switch the order. So we'll, at least for now, proceed in the order on the agenda. And let me just mention at the outset, couple background things. One, hoping we can have a collegial conversation. I'm sure on some of these budgets, advisory members are going to want to dig into some of the specifics, but hopefully a collegial conversation. As just previewed by that earlier conversation, with the possibility of an override next year looming, of course, you know, I mean, as every year, it's a tight budget year as every year, but maybe even a little more so with those concerns on people's minds. And what will be, I think, what advisory members will be especially interested in is what's changed in the budget, and if there are areas where the budget doesn't track with the guidance that we set out. I think it'd be particularly interested in hearing, you know, what's the rationale and what's the need, and you know, kind of understanding what's behind that. And I don't think this applies to anybody tonight, but if there were warrant articles, let's not discuss those tonight. We're going to have a couple meetings later in the cycle to get to warrant articles. So that being said, let's start, Chris, I think with inspector's budget, if you're going to take that. Floor is yours. If you would like me to share your budget document, I can do that, or you can share however you'd like to proceed.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, it's great.
Good. So it's a relatively normal year for the inspections departments. Most everything is just at guidance. There was a few minor changes that we'll go over. The software that we purchased back in 2019 through the Community Compact Grant that now we actually have to pay for, the fee for that has gone up annually. It's the first time they've raised the fees in 5 years. So it's about an 8% increase, I think. I don't expect that to go up again for another few years. In the meantime, we're also supposed to be getting the updated version of the software, which should make it a little bit more user-friendly. So that's a good thing. That has also been a huge benefit for the department, just so you all know. We're taking permits online, we're taking payments online, we're interacting with the public through this system, and it's in general been quite good, and it gives us a lot of access to data based upon, you know, how many permits of different types have we done, how much, you know, dollar value. It's really easy to make reports of all the different types of permits and what they're worth. So anyway, so that's sort of one minor increase, which is on the building page. Plumbing and electrical stay as they were. The only other major change was, and this was something that I was trying to get this budget to reflect the fact that, you know, we have an admin person, Jeannie, who does quite a bit of work for the department. You know, she processes all the electrical plumbing permits. She schedules the electrical inspections. She interacts with the public a lot, pulls files for people. She's quite busy with building specific related stuff, sort of outside of her like select board activities. And so I wanted our budget to have some sort of line to reflect the fact that we have an admin person, and that, you know, there are some hours of time that really are being dedicated to the building department that previously we've just been kind of borrowing out of the select board. You know, and especially if we're going to think about adjusting the fees, I wanted the budget to really reflect the fact that we actually have like a person working that hasn't really been reflected before. So because we always talk about sort of messing around with building fees a little bit. Well, this is maybe a reason to do that. Anyway, so we asked for a modest amount, which is 5 hours a week. And that's what we came to with talking back and forth with Jeremy and Diane and Jeannie, and trying to figure out what the best way to do it was. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at.
All right. Thanks, Chris. I've got just a couple of quick things just to start off, and then others may have some other questions for you. So glad to understand what the admin assistant line is about and picking up Jeannie's hours. I am thinking, and maybe this isn't a question for you, maybe it's a question for Diane or for someone to check on. I am assuming that if those hours are getting picked up in your budget, they are coming out of select board budget, so that Jeannie's budgeted for, I think it's 35 hours. And that we're not somehow double counting with you added hours in, but somebody else has got a budget line in for those hours as well. And that, as I said, it may not be a question for you.
So we had tried to do something like that and we ended up not doing it. Jeannie had requested additional hours for all of the things that she does. And we said, maybe this was the place to put them, was to put it in my budget so that I have this line item. So I do believe Jeannie gets a net gain so that she can work a few more hours a week.
And do you know, is that like going from 35 to 40?
I think she wasn't quite 35. I think she was like 32 or something like that. I'd have to check with Diane.
Deb, you just popped on.
I think Chris is correct. I think she was 32. And she does do.
Actually, she was at 26.
Oh, she was.
26 hours per week. But when during the pandemic, David allowed her to work as many hours as necessary. So she wasn't always staying within the budget. And so she was averaging, and then when Sharon left, she was helping me out with like 5 hours a week and things like that. So she was averaging probably about 32, 34 hours a week, you know, with different things. So this is, and then some budgets would run over, but other budgets in those departments were under. So you never really saw it, but this is really budgeting her hours that she has been working for the past couple of years.
And so do you know, Deb, then what's the total number of hours that she's budgeted for across?
She's still going to be 26 hours in the select board's office. She's going to be 5 hours here and 5 hours in DPW.
Okay, so total of 36 is what's budgeted.
Right, spread between the 3 different departments.
Yep. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that there was kind of consistent accounting of that. The one other thing, Chris, that I was just double checking on is that, of course, Klaus Ullman talked to us last week about IT budget and the department and consolidation. And if I'm remembering right, the software that you're using and talking about is pretty specialized to what you guys do, and so was not consolidated into his budget.
Yeah, we didn't roll it in, at least this budget cycle. It is pretty much only used by my department. It is tangentially used by the assessors because now they can view all the records online and they can view the plans that are on there, but they're not issuing permits or doing other things like that. The same thing goes with, you know, the Board of Health and the other departments that interact with a permit that comes in, and I ask them for an approval, but they're not really using it for their department. They're using it to sort of facilitate stuff that happens within my department.
Okay, but this is on your budget, and all your other IT stuff, it looks like, is going to be in their budget.
Correct.
Right. Okay, good. Thanks. Who else on advisory had questions?
I have a general question.
Go ahead, Peter.
And I may have asked this before and not like the answer, but I'll ask it again. And Deb, maybe you're the best person. Do we have a count of FTEs, of approved FTEs for the town?
In total?
I'll take any type of FTE that you have.
I would have to really look. I don't know off the top of my head, to be quite honest.
See, that and Dan, I'll leave this with you for the override next year. As a means of controlling costs, you have to know what the approved FTEs are, because here's a great case. We have an individual that started out at 26 hours and then what they call FTE creep. Nature hoards a vacuum, so her time is filled in with whatever tasks abound. Maybe backfilling, which is good because then there'll be a surplus of FTEs. But without that control of FTEs by department, the dollars really don't mean much. Here we have anecdotal, well, it should be X number of hours of one person, but that's just dollars that we're looking at. So anything we can do to actually get FTEs, and I know we started with the police department because that was a 24/7 operation, which made it easier to calculate FTEs. But for every other position in town that is paid, there should be an FTE count budgeted, approved, and the personnel board should be part of that, so that we can track, trend, and ensure that we don't get FTE creep.
Deb, do you know if that's something? I was just going to say, Deb, do you know if that's something the personnel board has done in the past?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, we kind of do it, but when we use this Form 5, we list the personnel that we have. And it's, you know, a public record, you know, how many hours we allocate them to budget and everything else like that. So we technically don't call it an FTE, but we do know what our, you know, personnel headcount is. I mean, we don't really look at
different things. Those are two very different things, because you can have 3 headcounts for an FTE if you split up a job, but an FTE is a standard unit of measure, and so that's why it's useful for control.
I mean, if you want the information, I can take some time and do that for you. I'm not aware that it's been done in the past, but I can do it if you want it.
Well, in the ERP, VADAR, there should be a way to capture that information, or in the payroll information. Who do we use for payroll?
Harper's. We use Harper's.
Okay, because an FTE is just the hours. It's 40 hours.
Right. Yeah. And
so you can have the actuals, but then there'll be the budgeted, which I think is what you're getting to, is that each individual is allotted a certain number of hours per week for 52 weeks. And that's your total FTEs. And you can measure the actual against that budget each month and see salary variances. Are they caused by FTEs or by rate? And so it's, again, another way of managing, measuring, and monitoring the largest expense most organizations, people-heavy organizations, have.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think it's a little different in a municipality because our rates don't change. You know, so it's always the variance is always going to be based on hours, because of this budget, we don't have any increases in budget unless we have a new employee or something like that during the course of the year.
Right. It does seem like it'd be interesting to know, you know,
yeah,
like
no problem.
the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever, you know, what's happened to number of people working and the conversion just by adding up hours and dividing by 40 to FTEs.
Yeah, we can do that.
And given, as you said, Deb, that all the numbers are there, if that, we should talk if that turns out to be an immensely complicated thing to do, but it seems like it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I don't think it would be.
Yeah, okay. I think that would be interesting and would get to what Peter was asking about. Jane, it looked like you had a comment earlier.
Yes, but Nora's hand has been up, so
okay, so we'll go to Nora and then back to you, Jane. Nora, go ahead.
If we drill it down, I'd be curious to drill it down based on last week's conversation or the week before, I'm losing track of, with Council on Aging, to be looking at benefited, which I believe is at 20 hours a week, in addition to the full-time employee, because to me, I think it was an extra $12,000 that we're not even really counting in that for the benefited positions. And a lot of people are looking at, they were less than 19 hours a week, and now they're asking for a benefited position, just scooching up a little bit to just 20 hours plus. So that to me is impactful too.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Nora. Seems like that could be part of a count as well. Jane, what did you?
Well, I just want to wholeheartedly support Peter's point, because, you know, we've seen
I mean, this certainly has nothing to do with Jeannie. Jeannie's wonderful and she's a great resource for the town, but many departments are looking for many extra hours this year on top of extra hours that have been approved in previous years. And, you know, at some point, it really has a significant effect on the budget cumulatively. And especially in a year like this, where, you know, every day we read in the paper about more layoffs at different places. And here we are, you know, contemplating a lot more hours in a lot more departments. It just seems like there's a mismatch here of what people are asking us to do and, you know, what the economic times dictate, especially with an override looming for next year and the next several years. So, you know, I think we just have a mismatch here of all these requests for all these extra hours in very difficult economic times, with a 4.5% hit to the budget for salaries, you know, because of inflation. And I'm not saying that shouldn't have been done, but it is a significant increase to our budget already without these extra additions.
Yeah.
So we're way over advisory guidance. You know, anyway, and now it's just more and more hours. I have a deep concern about all of these extra hours that are being requested.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So it sounds like Deb will be able to pull some numbers together that should
sure.
help provide some perspective and context on that. Steve, Wasim, anything you wanted to add in before we move on?
I had one question, and I apologize because I may have only been paying half attention when you mentioned this, but you had said something about the building fees, and I just wanted to sort of get your sort of summary on where the building fees are at. And I think last year you kind of had determined that everything was, you know, pretty high. You couldn't move up on them, but this year I want to know if anything had changed.
Yeah, so I actually, in December, I put together a proposed change, which was like a real minor change, to take sort of what we have and make a couple of little tweaks. We had a few things that were like flat fee minimums across categories that don't really make sense to have a flat fee minimum. It would make more sense to have a minimum, but then also charge based upon the value of the work, you know, depending if you're doing something really substantial. So, you know, like we've been charging $100 flat fee for sheet metal permits. Well, you know, I've seen permits come through for $100,000 worth of mechanical work. That should be $1,000 permit fee, but instead it's $100. So we're going to make some tweaks like that, which just sort of get things caught up to where they should be. That's probably going to amount to maybe only a few $1,000s in additional revenue, but I think it makes a tweak. Now, I did look around again at all the other towns around us, and we're still kind of right where everybody else is. $10 a thousand is basically where most of the smaller towns are. Now, other towns have edged up a bit. Framingham and Natick have both gone up to $12 and $15 per thousand. We currently charge $12 per thousand for commercial permits. So we could make that jump to say we're going to go from $10 a thousand to $12 a thousand. I did some math on it the other day. It works out to about $25,000 extra dollars coming into the town if we do that. It's not a huge bump, but it's something. At the same time, the department, all told, you know, we brought in 22, at least on my, it's going to be a little different than Deb's numbers, but it's pretty darn close. $229,000 came in FY22, and what did we cost? $120,000 to run. So I mean, we're profitable. Let's just say with the way that we're currently setting our fees. But you know, obviously, if we have an increase in costs by having an admin line or whatever other expenses we need to have, it justifies making maybe some tweaks to the fee schedule. It has been 6 years since anybody touched it, so it seems like it might be time to make some minor changes at least.
Yeah, I think I would certainly be in favor of that. I think for a lot of the departments where there's an increase in the expenses, let's say in salaries, you know, I think we like to see if they can essentially find a way to pay for it themselves by either cutting back on expenses, or if you are a revenue generating department, to, you know, look at ways that you can increase your revenue. So I think that if you can tweak in a manner where you would cover the additional ask in your budget, I think that would go a long way to sort of assuaging our fears. But
it's certainly an option, and it's, as long as the select board signs off on the new permit fees, it's certainly doable.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I think I would second what Steve said. I mean, obviously, we don't want to get out of line with other towns, but if in this environment, other towns are doing this, you know, a reasonable number of other towns are doing it, seems like it might be a sensible thing to bring to the select board and see if they'd be okay with it.
Sure.
Anybody else? Okay, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Helpful. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Let me shut down the screen share. And let's go on to Conservation Commission. Michael, looks like you just unmuted, so I'm guessing you're doing this.
Yeah, I'll give a start.
Would you like me to share your document? Do you want to? You're already doing it. Great.
At least part of the document I can move around. Yeah, so it's me
Great.
here, and my co-chair Courtney Eck is here, as well as the treasurer Kelly McClintock is here. I'll give a little overview, and you'll see what questions you have and whether the others want to chime in. Let me just move this so I don't look so strange. The overall, we've come in with level funded, maybe a hair underneath the level funded by a big $600. But the composition of our budget has changed in that we are asking for a higher salary budget, and then we've made some cuts in our expenses side. You can see the increase is primarily on the conservation agent, which I'll go into, and then we've made some adjustments in our land management to reach the fact that overall it's level funded. The agent salary is mainly changing in this case. We're basically having a fairly large bump in the hourly rate to $40 from the 35. We're actually cutting the hours down a hair to see how that works. Essentially, we have an interim. We're trying to hire our new permanent agent. We're working with an interim agent that's working out fine for now. It's a very tight market for agents. It's hard to get people. We are sort of a human resource issue. We are under negotiation with somebody. We're basically trying to get a good experienced agent, since it works well for the town, given some of our past experiences. And the hourly rate here is something that was worked on with the personnel board and also with Diane at the time as the interim town manager, and what other rates were for an experienced agent of the $40 an hour that we have in the budget here. And we're hoping with an experienced agent, we could also do just a few less hours from 35 down to 33. We are hopefully that somebody permanent and experienced will be in place by the beginning of fiscal year 24, based on some of our expectations from some negotiations. And so that's why we have, given the marketplace for agents, there's a lot of towns looking for agents and have openings. But to essentially, but at the same time, while we're doing that, our other staff person we're keeping constant with just a simple cost of living increase, no change in hours there. Our activities are basically wetlands permitting and some land management of town open space in town. Our biggest expense side is on property maintenance, as it's called here, and also had special projects, which is really also land management related tasks that we've been doing. We're in the midst of a fairly significant change on some of the property management stuff there, in the sense that we're getting some working with DPW, and that's an evolving process, but they're managing to do some of the work. And so we feel comfortable that we can make a significant change in our budget there to compensate for the increase in the salary increase. And on the, so we have to thank DPW for doing the work there. And plus we also, the rest of our budget is fairly small, only a few $1,000s for expenses. That's basically held flat with little ups and downs. So in that case, for the land and on land management, we do have other resources to do some of the land management. Essentially, we have the ongoing expenses of doing the land management, plus we're trying to do some improvements, which we've been trying to do over the last number of years that we've been talking about and doing some projects. And we've got land management reports for different properties that we're working on, and we'll come forth with some work with the select board on what actually we want to do with our properties. They've been much greater demand for use of the open space. And we do have, it's come to our attention, we have some other funds that are sitting on the town accounts that we're going to work with the select board as well as with advisory, hopefully this calendar year. We didn't get to doing it in our last calendar year doing transitions on our commission, where we can possibly, where we should be able to fund some of the land management from there, as well as even possibly help with our staffing expenses too, going forward based on some other fees that we're getting. But that's something to be worked on for the next year, that we can come in with maybe some reductions. And we might even be able to return some money this year for land management based on working with DPW. So that's the higher thing there. I don't know if Kelly or Courtney want to add anything to that before there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll wait to see what you guys think.
Courtney, Kelly, please feel free to just jump in if there's anything you'd like to add.
I would just, as a quick momentary comment, emphasize as strongly as I can the incredible difference DPW has made for us. They got some new equipment 2 years ago. Sean is very enthusiastic about using it to help us. They've done a terrific job, and it's showing up in the budget too.
Courtney, anything you wanted to add?
No, I was just saying that I have nothing to add.
Okay, perfect. So Michael, let me just start just to make sure that I've got the pieces in mind. So the decline in the property maintenance budget and the special projects line being zeroed out is essentially the DPW, that's the DPW effect.
It's partly that and partly that. We don't have any particular bigger projects to do on the land management this year, and that we're hoping even moving forward that we would use some of the other funds that filing funds that we've recently told that they're sitting on the accounts, that we could use these to do any of the needed larger improvements that we would do there. So it's a function of two things.
Okay. Anybody else on advisory with comments, questions, concerns on this budget?
Yeah, Michael, just a question. What's the qualifications for a conservation agent?
It's essentially for an experienced one. It's experience doing Wetlands Protection Act under the regulatory structure that Massachusetts has, which is basically an important part of just being experienced there. It's generally their environmental degrees, environmental science degrees, primarily of either whether it's bachelor's or even master's to some degree, but historically it's been people who have worked in the wetlands area over the years, and preferably in Massachusetts, because of, like every state, we have our particular regulatory setup.
Nora?
Hi there. Thank you. So I'm trying to understand, is there a contracted person now that's doing the 59,000, or was that from before? And how many, and forgive me, how many hours a week was that? And
that was based on a budgeted amount of 35 hours a week on at a lower salary. We now have somebody who's working a little bit above that salary, but not all of the hours. We're basically understaffed at the moment, but we're doing a good job of dealing with our wetlands protection permitting process. There's no hurdles there while we're looking to work out a permanent person. We have a wonderful interim person, so that we're probably going to be under budget this year while we're treading water.
Is that contracted employee or is that outside? I'm just thinking of the.
They're working as an employee at about the sort of 20-hour-a-week level, but it's basically essentially everything is being done as salary people. We don't, since the big push is not to have consultants or contractors, so this person is being hired as basically an intermittent employee.
And I guess where are you finding, where do you advertise? Like Indeed, or I'm just curious if
you advertise. There are professional associations. There's various professional associations. There's a Massachusetts association related to conservation commissions, and it gets posted there.
And being that we're a smaller town, does that mean, and say for example, I believe around 1,500 properties among other, I'm sure there's other town properties and whatnot, but I'm just thinking, isn't that a little bit different than say somebody like hiring for Natick or Framingham? I'm just curious.
Actually, we have a lot. We have a lot of wetlands in town
Right.
compared with Natick, and we have different local bylaw, etc. So we actually do have a lot of permitting that goes on. There's a lot of people, with houses being sold, new septics going in. A lot of those need conservation permitting. And then since the pandemic started, people have been doing a lot of decks, additions, you name it. So there's a lot going on.
It's a function of the fact that as we all know, with private drinking water wells and private septic systems,
right, okay.
and the prevalence of wetlands, it's a more complicated permitting setting than most towns in the area that have municipal utilities.
And I would
advertise in a number of different places. Yes.
A 40B proposal is just as complex to deal with in Sherborn as it would be in Framingham.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Wasim?
Did we, I seem to recall something about the conservation agent last year as well. Was there a similar request either to increase the number of hours or to increase the rate last year?
Yes, we did increase the number of hours, not the rate at the time, because of the workload. We had an increase in hours.
Michael, did the increase in the hourly rate happen earlier this year, or that really is just looking forward to fiscal 24?
That's looking forward.
Okay. Okay.
The rate that was in place this year was the basic rate from before with the standard COLA.
Okay.
It was the hours that were increased because basically there was between the work for the permitting and also just doing the land management overall was it was much more than some previous than the workload could handle, than a person could handle.
And could you remind us what was the change in hours?
That one I can't remember.
Sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to get as clear a picture.
It was a significant increase at the time. We're also trying to back it down with our future thing from 35 back down to 33 in consultation with people about what we think the job could be done with an experienced person based on their salary. And that's something we'll fine tune over time. I feel like to the extent that that when you hire a good experienced people, whether you can find that the hours are truly used or needed, we can make some adjustments when we have a person in place there. So we'd like to keep some flexibility in that for negotiating there.
Yep. Jane, it looked like you may have had a comment earlier.
Yeah, Michael, I'm just have a question about that $40 an hour. I appreciate the reduction in hours, but I just did a quick search online for some of the other conservation agent positions, and the highest I'm seeing is in the 30s, including Medfield, where at the high end of the range, they're at $35 an hour, at the high end of the salary range that they're quoting. So I wonder if that's just a little bit too rich for the market.
Well, let's put it this way, it hasn't shown up in applications. But that was based on, I think, some work that Vicki Rellis, when she looked around, and we did some work. This was some months ago. I don't have the numbers here with me, but she did some digging around and seemed to find, and we were looking at talking to some other people working in other towns in Medway and others that were showing some higher salaries. And so this came out of a discussion of looking around then and working with Vicki.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of searching around with Vicki. I spoke to agents that have jobs, not just what was being advertised. And I dug through some budgets and stuff. And, we had advertised this position for many months. And even so, even though we have since increased to the up to $40 an hour on the advertisements, the agents have given us feedback that they would not leave their current positions for that number. And we haven't had applicants other than we have our interim agent who is she likes us for some reason. So we did look very hard at that number, and like it was many months of not getting any applicants, or getting applicants that were terribly underqualified, or maybe just applied from looking at the newspaper with really no relevant skills for what is a very technical position in terms of, delineating wetlands and being able to navigate regulatory landscape. So it does seem like a big jump, but there was a lot of thought and many months of search put into that.
Courtney, on Jane's point, do you recall what some of the hourly rate numbers were from other towns?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure I have those written down somewhere. I especially have I remember the rates of some of the places that were not getting filled.
Right.
But I do have that information somewhere, and I can probably locate it.
If it's easy to track down, I think it'd be interesting. I think people would appreciate seeing it, just having a sense of where.
Yeah. Part of it is, as you say. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mike.
The fact that, right, it's interesting to see that we haven't gotten much interest. Right. That's of course is the pudding. It sort of is like it's sort of surprising to me that, but so. That's what we're confronting.
As an economist who spent some time thinking about labor markets, I get that point. Still, interesting data points. I would think, given that you would get people to move around, but it's interesting. There's some rigidity in the market or something that I find kind of interesting myself. Right. That is interesting. Jane, did you have anything more on that?
No, I just would encourage everyone to take a look at the current listings that I just quickly was bringing up, because they do seem to be pretty uniformly under $40 an hour.
Jane, which towns was it? Just so everybody hears that.
There's several in the Medfield is probably the best comparison that I saw. There's a few on the Cape. There's
are these the job listings? Are these job postings?
Yeah, I just Googled, conservation.
Let me
those
check
are the openings.
Yeah, let me check, Jane, because some of those may be the same openings that were still unfilled as of when I initially conducted this search, but I will find my.
Okay.
Just a quick question, Jane, while you have that open.
Yeah, Nora, go ahead.
I'll be really quick. Jane, while you have that open, where are those advertised in terms of on your Google search? And did Sherborn's job come up when you were Googling it?
That's a really good question. I am not seeing Sherborn's job here. And the site that first came up that I'm currently on is the MACC jobs board. I assume that's a Massachusetts.
Yeah,
it's
it's a free posting, and I wonder, I probably need to re-up that one. We probably fell off because we've been on there a while. I've had to re-up it before. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Anybody else with comments, questions, concerns?
I have a question for Michael or Courtney. There's a current person occupying the agent that's a salaried employee of the town, I believe. What's the expectation when this is filled by an external candidate for that individual?
This person is just an interim one, so that there's no commitment time-wise in terms of a contractual agreement, so that could be changed at will, basically. It's my understanding.
Okay, and the only engagement that individual has been with the Conservation Commission that you know
of. Yes.
Meaning, Peter, not working somewhere else in town hall as well.
Yeah, I'm anticipating another FTE is going to show up in someone else's budget.
Oh, no, this person is only working with us.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate that very much. And we'll look forward to hearing a few more numbers and seeing, where that lands. But as I said, Michael, I understand about labor markets and the ultimate test of, are we getting applicants or not?
Oh yeah, no, it is surprising.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we move on? You're through everything. Okay. Yeah. All right. We will go on to sustainability, and Dorothea, the floor is yours. I'm happy to share your document if you like, or if you would like to, that's fine too, or whatever, however you'd like to proceed.
Hi everyone. Yes, please, Dan, if you want to share the budget, that would be great.
Yep. I will do that in just a second. Okay, I think everybody should be able to see that.
Mm-hmm. Good. This will be straightforward. Gino is not present tonight, so I will do this for the two of us. We have pretty straightforward proposed the same amount as last year's budget. As you might all know, we have gotten a grant for doing a climate action and resilience plan, which is a big undertaking this year. So that was coming in at $38,750 through the MVP grant. And my work predominantly is the outreach and the work with the consultant and all the events and the community work that's associated with this grant. On Gino's side, I think we're both working on different topics. Gino is working with the town buildings, as you all know, and with the Green Communities Act and grant scheme. So in that regard, both of us are very busy, and we're expecting more work to come to us, because I think sustainability will be becoming a bigger issue as we have to look at the buildings and the long-term climate goals for this town. And we will need to crank up education and other things to reach these goals. When we look at these budgets, there's barely anything that I have suggested for supplies. I will have a couple of events, and I have budgeted $600 for supplies such as a tablecloth and maybe some brochures. And the rest is pretty much straightforward, our salaries. Do you have any questions?
So one just quick thing I wanted to check on the accounting at the bottom on the grant.
Mm-hmm.
So the grant for supporting the town's work in doing the climate action plan. The consultant who's hired is getting paid something. Is that in this accounting, or where does that part appear here?
That's a very good question, Dan. That part does not appear here. What you see at the bottom is, and Deb has to clarify if I represent this not the wrong way, not the right way. But this is referring to the state earmark.
Okay.
That was where this position was initially funded, and that came through the last town administrator. We shared this with another town, and this is how my position was initially funded. Is that correct, Deb?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And this is similar to as it was we looked at a department last week where there wasn't on IT, there was no sustainability department in FY21. So the funding initially went through the sustainability grant, but then there was an additional $24,000 of spending on top of that. And that's what you see down there. $23,000 went to the select board budget, and $1,000 went to planning. And that's how it was accounted for that year. But in FY27, it's in this.
Okay, thanks, Deb. I misunderstood. So it sounds like the way to think about these numbers is this is really putting together the FY21 numbers.
Exactly.
It wasn't in the official budget, but this is putting together a kind of set of shadow budget numbers for FY21 for comparison.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, got it. I misunderstood. Okay, thanks. That's
no worries. I should have clarified it earlier, but that's all good questions, and that helps me to clarify also to other members from the advisory board. So the number I was initially referring to, our big grant that came out through me single-handedly, was happening last year in 2022. We got $38,145 for hiring a consultant that some of you met, who will help us with the planning process and crafting a climate action plan in concert with the entire community, with the boards and committees. And that grant for the consultant, we got the grant from the state, that portion, and we also suggested $31,432 as in-kind hours, meaning like predominantly my hours and Gino's hours, and of course, tons of volunteers that have helped to put together interviews that gave the consultant some input on the predominantly the issues that they perceive in their various departments. And that grant will help us to do strategic planning for the next decade in this town to reduce emissions, and to not only that, but to put our path forward in worsening climate change. And that's a really important topic that has unfortunately fallen behind due to the pandemic. And I'll leave it at that. To take
does anyone know how much in fiscal 23 the total dollar amount of the grants we applied for? So
yes.
The total that we applied for, the total we received,
mm-hmm.
and the total that are still outstanding.
That's Mr. Gaetano, right?
Yes.
He's the dog. Yes, I can give an answer to that. So you're referring to fiscal 2023, right?
This year since July.
So
as a grant worker, having known many grant writers, their stock in trade is how many grants they land, and it's a numbers game. It's like sales. You apply for 1,000 grants, you get feedback from 200, and you land 20. And so, maybe there's 5 million in grants you apply for, you get feedback from 500,000, and you land 50,000 in a year. We don't track that.
We do. We write an annual report that reflects all our grants that we have applied for and which we garnered. So that's information that's publicly available. So for this year, I'm putting together the annual report at this time. In 2022, from my side, from the outreach side, I've applied for a grant MVP, and I got that. It's 38,750. And then on Gino's side, I'm not.
So let me stop. So you applied for one and you got it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a positive.
Right.
That was the only grant you applied for?
Say it again, please.
That one grant, that was the only grant you applied for?
No, I applied for 2, and I got the second one was just announced now. So there was also another grant of $2,500 through a private foundation.
What's your objectives and goals in applying for grants? Is it unreasonable to apply for a grant one a week? So 52 grants a year?
That's unreasonable, Mr. Gaetano.
What is reasonable?
What's reasonable, when you look at the entire sustainability department, I think you have the town.
Just for grant writers, not any particular department. Because we have the fire department doing their own grants, we have the police department doing their own grants, and we're not counting those. Yet I thought there was some overlap proposed when this idea of a grant writer was pitched. It would pay for itself. And I distinctly remember that.
Did not apply for being a grant writer, Mr. Gaetano. I think there's a misunderstanding.
Yeah, Peter, I'm going to back Dorothea up here. It is not a grant writing position, and it never was. And I think anybody on advisory who believes that her position as a grant writer is misinformed. I think that there are potentially some people who are on the current or previous select boards who wanted that, but that is not the actual outcome. So I remember this clearly because we had this discussion last year. And so one of the things that we were trying to do is to view the sustainability department collectively. Again, they work as a team. Gino primarily is the one who does a lot of the sort of grant writing activities, and Dorothea does the outreach. So her position, it's not really her job to be a grant writer. It's really not her job at all. So I think it's unfair of you to question the number of grants that she has applied for, because that's not her job. I do think that it would be instructive for us to know collectively, the sustainability department, how much monies in grants in total you guys have brought in, which I think you indicated you're working on that for the annual report. I don't really care to know the separation between what Gino did and what you did. I think last year we established that you guys are collectively a team, and we just want to know what the sustainability department is doing over the course of a year, basically both in your activities in outreach and also in the grants that you're bringing in. So I guess if you're able to summarize kind of your year's activity, that's probably what we would be interested to know about right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. I can summarize from my side. I don't know if Gina was able to garner a Green Communities grant this year, and I have to defer maybe to Michael Lesser if he can, if he has any idea. But I think he did not, because he's still working on the old one, which happened in 2021 when he got $71,000 for the streetlights conversion and some other things. This year, we got the grant, as I mentioned, $38,000 plus for the Climate Action and Resilience Plan. So we will present this to the board and you guys will have a better overview. And thanks for pointing out what kind of work I'm supposed to do, because I think there's a lot of perceptions of what I do and what I should not do. And I think that needs to be cleared up. And I see Mrs. Matarazzo's hand up.
Yeah, so we'll just hang on 1 second. I was just going to say, Dorothy, I think since it sounds like you and Gino will be pulling much of this information that people have been asking about together for annual report.
Yes.
I'd say as soon as that's ready, I think people on advisory would be, would welcome, getting a copy of that and getting a chance to see that.
Absolutely, absolutely, Dan.
So Jane, let's go to you, Jane.
Okay, thank you. I have I guess a couple of questions, and then I'd just like to comment on what Steve and Peter previously both said. The first two questions. The $38,000 grant that you referred to, Dorothea, for the climate plan. Am I correct that that's essentially a wash from the point of view of our budget, because it was a $38,000 grant, but that money is going to be used to pay the consultant?
It's not a wash.
That has no net effect on our budget, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And then, I think, Deb, what you said earlier, I just want to make sure I understood it correctly, is that the 38,000 grant that is referenced down below is the original earmark, right? But am I correct that we are not currently receiving 38,000 a year for this?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. With respect to the comment I wanted to make on what both Peter and Steve previously said, I guess I agree with both of them in the sense that I do think that as things evolved, Dorothea's position was not advertised as a grant writing position. But I do also clearly remember that when the presentation was made to the voters to initially have a sustainability department, there was absolutely a comment made that this position should be able to more than pay for itself. So I think both statements are correct. I think Peter is correct that grant writing and paying for itself was a critical factor in what was, if you will, sold to the voters when they voted for this department, this position, whatever you want to call it. I also agree that Dorothea's position as advertised was not specifically advertised as a grant writing position, because at that point Gino was sort of pegged to do that work. So there is a tension there, I think, between what the voters thought they were voting on and how things have evolved. And, we're almost double what that original budget was that was approved by the voters. And, voters were told this would more than pay for itself. So I do think that where we stand currently is a bit of a mismatch with where we started. Putting aside the fact, as Steve points out, that Dorothea's position was not advertised specifically as a grant writing position, I do recall that.
I would just chime in that I have the same recollection that Jane does back from some years ago, when I thought Jane put it well in saying that there's it creates some tension because Dorothea, that's not what your position was set up to do.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of the reason I think this keeps coming up. And that you keep hearing about this, which I'm sure is its own set of frustrations, is in a sense because of what those expectations were set back when.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, again, I would come back to what I had said before about, I think the material you're pulling together for the annual report will really help to kind of clarify what all you and Gino have been doing and where do we stand on grants in terms of, answering the question that Peter raised and that Jane touched on. Okay, so others have hands up. So Michael, I think you're next, and then to Nora.
Sure. Hi. I guess I'll speak as part of the Energy and Sustainability Committee and as well as being part of the process for a number of years. I would say that this historical issue around the grants, that I think that it's important for advisory, and I would say to the select board and people in general, that this work has evolved significantly since that town vote back in the beginning. The grant arena has changed dramatically in terms of it being much more competitive and spread out in terms of the fact that basically the big issue in the room is the fact that we have a climate emergency or a crisis or a climate change issue problem, that the state has passed laws and acts to basically get everybody in line to try to address this major problem. The town had agreed and voted. A more recent vote was a vote by the town last year to vote that there's a climate emergency and to vote that we need to do climate action plans and to work on meeting the targets at the state level that are half of our reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050, with steps along the way. The state has its own regulatory, its own requirements to meet these targets along the way with plans each way. This is in a way maybe an unfunded mandate. One can view it, or you can view it as the fact that this is a social obligation for each town to do its part to meet this, this challenge. Doing a climate action plan is a significant piece of work for the town to undertake, and it's requested, and the town voted to do it essentially last year. And this position, and I don't think the funding for these kind of work is really available that much at the state level and in other sources. We can still try to get some grants for some of our town buildings and whatnot, which we're still pursuing. But that, I think, the expectation of this kind of funding, I think that we have to move beyond that. And whether people feel that, and people have to shift to whether they feel like this is the way that each town has to figure out how to meet its obligations to reduce its carbon emissions in line with the state goals and with, one could say, global needs. And I think that this work should be viewed from that lens, as opposed to the lens of this is cost recovering work that will be there, that the broader environment, maybe it's a bad pun, has changed significantly since the initial town vote, and the town's made a more recent vote to move ahead to address climate change. And so I think I think it's the performance against dealing with our climate change goals and our needs that should be the metric for dealing with this kind of work. That the funding will be sought as it was sought this time and successfully got to, at least we can get help because it's a big job to do a plan. But I strongly advocate that we sort of rethink what we want this department to do in line with other goals that we have to meet.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Michael. Nora, I think you're up next. You're muted.
Don't forget Wasim, because I think he was before me. I really don't want to add too much to this, other than I was a voter several years ago. I am new to advisory, but to me, words mean things, and I have to go with Jane. And understanding, this is before my time. I was not here, but it's sustainability grant coordinator. Their words mean things, and so I was always under the impression, even looking at this, that there was part of seeking grants, and I'm just curious, where was the grant? And so I just want to, I don't need to, I understand, but can you say where the grant was from for the full 38, or then you said there was a private
Hold on, Nora, can I share my screen?
Yeah, let me just stop my screen share and you can go ahead and share.
Let's see if I can do this. Because I don't want anybody to walk off with any misunderstandings of what I'm doing. So let's look at this. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not
no,
yet.
it's coming up.
It's coming up. Okay.
And it's now.
This up or?
It's now visible.
It's not visible. Hold on.
It is. We can see it.
Do I need to blow this up, Nora? Can you
No,
see?
I can see it. Yes, thank you.
Because I think really sometimes you need to see the numbers to understand what I'm doing. And I have to say, this might help you a little bit. So this is, let me blow this up here. So I have started in 2020. And that is my salary. This is the grant I did in the COVID year. 21, that's my salary. That's the grant I got. And in 22, that is my salary, and that's the grant I got. And I'm just talking about my single-handedly written grants. And that grant you were just saying is from for the MVP grant through the Department of Energy and Environment. And if you add up all of this, it's $45,000 in the last years. And that's my salary, $83,000 year to date. And it was just put together by financing, by HR. So if you look at this, you spend on me $83,000 plus. I got you $45,000 on grants. And then if you add the earmark in that you got through the state, you spent $451 in the last 3 years on me. Is that giving you a little bit of understanding why I'm a little bit aggravated? At this point, I have to say, you're talking about things all around. You don't even look at your annual reports.
That's why I'm asking the question. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Dorothy.
You read those reports before you come into these meetings, because employees look bad as if they were not doing anything. And I'm saying this because it still boggles my mind that Mr. Galliotano thinks that I'm a grant writer. What do you know about what people are doing in town?
Dorothy, I think this comes back to what Steve and Jane and Michael touched on with before you joined the town, there were conversations, and that put, I think, in the minds of voters kind of an expectation of where things were going to go. And then I think things went in a different direction. And I think it's that tension that people are reacting to.
Right. Because that has cleared up for these people that are still doubting that money is being spent on something that's not coming back to town. I have been working here for almost 3 years. You spend $451 on my work. What I want to tell you is that I have been also in town government for 10 years. And what I'm seeing here is like people looking and trying to argue about things that they don't clearly understand. While big tickets like the schools, people never ask questions about that.
Yeah.
Dorothy, I have to strongly object to that because we have had several meetings with the schools, and
we asked lots of questions about the schools.
Questions asked.
I'd really love to hear what Wasim has to say.
So I think we should get to everybody else and kind of keep the conversation.
But would this clear up what I have contributed in the last years?
Yeah. Dorothea, let's keep the conversation moving. And Wasim, let's go to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you fine.
Okay, So Dorothea, I'm very sorry that you feel that you need to actually explain what you're doing. I really like and I appreciate all the work you do. You're very passionate about what you do. Please don't understand any of what's being said as something against you. This has absolutely nothing with you and all the work that you do. It is great work. I think like we are here in a position as an advisory to kind of represent the voters from the wallet perspective, right? That's kind of like our job.
But see, I understand this. I've been elected town meeting member in Needham for 10 years.
No, so again, this is absolutely nothing against. I appreciate all the work you do. I appreciate kind of the passion that you have for this work. Has absolutely, please just understand that nothing that's being said is a reflection of your work, right? In no way, right?
But I'm just being reflective of our employees to our boards. You don't even know what you're doing. There's some people in this room that are still thinking I'm writing grants for everybody in town hall. I mean, let's be honest. That's not good understanding and a sign of broken down communication.
Yeah. So
this is.
Go ahead, Wasim.
This is probably historical stuff because that is and Michael, maybe I agree with you. There are needs, and so these needs necessitate that we adapt. But I think really this all goes back to how initially how this was sold to the town. So, but again, please don't understand any of what's being said here as reflection on you. Not at all. All right. This is probably a reflection more on how this was originally sold to the town, that we can bring in someone and the grants will be able to pay essentially for that person. Now, so again, this is all historical. This is all historical. Has nothing with your kind of what you're doing. It probably has more to do with what how things shifted since. And I would argue, if you may just allow me, like for us to reduce, to have the most impact, maybe we should not be living in Sherborn, right? I mean, if all of us are living in Sherborn, have to commute longer distances, the best way for us as a society to reduce our footprint is just, go live in an apartment complex somewhere, high-rise buildings, significantly lower carbon footprint than living in Sherborn. So what are we doing here?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Wasim. I just wanted to pick up on something Wasim said, Dorothea, which is, I'm sure this has been very frustrating for you to hear this, but as Wasim said, and I would emphasize the point, this isn't about your work. As he said,
I refute this. I know everybody.
Just please let me finish. Please let me finish, and then we'll come back. This isn't about your work. This is about the expectations that voters, had in an earlier time. I think Michael offered a narrative for why maybe things have changed. But I think, what you're kind of getting here is, people are saying, hey, but, back then there was a conversation and some expectations, and that's what you're bumping into. So this is not a criticism of you or your work. It's advisory. It's advisory, as Wasim said, trying to just be as thoughtful as possible about, what's the money coming in, what's the money going out, and trying to make sure that that's all being done in a way that is going to work best for the voters. So I want to get to other people who had comments, and then Dorothea, will come back to you. But let me go to Daryl and then to Natalie, and then we'll come back to you, Dorothea.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment. There's been reference to the program that was sold to the town. And I'm pretty sure I sat through all the same presentations that everybody else did. And I do recall hearing a few things mentioned during those presentations that I thought, oh, people might misinterpret that or or not understand that Sherborn is in a different situation. So for example, a lot of the towns that had pursued this, or municipalities, I'll say, because they weren't all towns, some were cities like Cambridge, when they would talk about what was able to be achieved and what savings were realized from pursuing sustainability programs, I thought that would work in a city where you have businesses and just a different makeup of what activities and enterprises are in a municipality. So I really didn't expect that we would be covering all the costs for the sustainability coordinators. So I had a very different expectation apparently than a lot of other folks. But I did want to let you know that there might be more of the residents who feel that way as well. That's it.
Thanks, Daryl. I mean, I sat through a lot of those meetings as well, and I suspect, as you just highlighted, lots of things were said, and people heard and took away different things, and I think that's part of what we're seeing reflected. Part of what we're seeing reflected this evening. Natalie, I think you're next.
Yeah, Dorothea, you talked about the annual report. Could you tell us when that will be done?
Sure. I think the deadline is end of this month, I'm believing. I was
okay, and then end of this month, you'll have the annual report and will tell us.
I'm guessing you're thinking end of February rather than end of January.
Okay, because I was sending out an email today, I didn't get a response yet on when it was due, but I can certainly provide that earlier.
Okay, I think as soon as you have that, it'll be helpful for people to see it. So I think we've probably gotten about as far as we can get. And everybody sort of heard all the different comments on every side. Diane, I see you raised a hand, and then Dorothy, I'll give you the last brief word. Diane?
I just want to clear it up that the annual report, the reports are due into the select board's office by February 13th. And they'll go into the annual report book that gets published, and whoever wants a copy can get one.
Thank you, Diane.
Thanks, Diane. So Dorothea, let's give you a brief last word, but I think we've kind of gotten as far as we can get on this, so we should be moving on.
The brief last
I
word
do have a question beyond grant writing. This is Natalie. You have a consultant drafting an action plan, right?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have an action plan? I thought that was something you did in your annual report, an action plan of what we should do in Sherborn? No, you don't do action plans?
Natalie, the climate action plan is something that you do with the community over the span of 9 months. So end of June, we are expecting to have a draft written plan for the community.
Okay.
Okay, shall we take this offline in sense of like this may take longer?
Yeah.
Is that a good suggestion?
Yeah, because I think we've kind of gotten as far as we can get on this conversation with.
I want to do some final words here.
Yeah, just briefly, please.
Briefly, Dan and Stephen and also Vasim, thank you so much for your support. I know that you understand what sustainability does. I know that you do not criticize my work, but I do criticize how the boards work in this town. And I have to tell you, there's got to be, we have to tackle these problems that are coming down the pike. You have to work better together, better communication. That is essential for this town to be successful. And I want your success badly. And that's why I'm still here. So with that, I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Dorothea. And thank you and everyone else who spoke up for let's call it a lively discussion. And Dorothea, thank you for bearing with as we went back and forth on all of
this info. I want people to come off informed.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so let's move on. And let's go to planning board. And Chris, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Floor is yours. I can share your document if you wish.
That's fine.
All right, give me 1 second.
So this is going to be really fast, I hope. Our budget is level funded from last year. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if there's something that someone has a question about, please ask.
Anybody?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Beautiful. I hope all budgets are like this.
We had a bump in printing and mailing. We have some bylaws changes that we're working on, and so we're going to be printing new bylaws and new rules and regulations. And we're not going to put dates in it, and we're not going to put names in it. So for the next 10 years, they will continue to look current. But if anyone has any questions, I'm here. So
I'm getting the impression everybody is good. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yep. That was a brilliant presentation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so then our last one is Board of Health. Daryl, are you doing that?
Yes, I will be, and I'm about to.
Floor is yours, and oh, great. I was just going to offer to share, but it looks like you've got it.
Yes, just have to figure out which other file I want to open. Hold on.
That's lovely.
Yes, in catacombs down in Siena, Italy. Let's see. Okay. Is that large enough for people to see?
Good for me.
Okay. I'm going to skip over the things that just have the regular % increase. And I'm also going to start discussing from the bottom. And Ellen should be joining soon. You might see her trying to log in.
I think she just got on.
Okay. So I'm going to go up from the bottom. We have a larger increase for dues and memberships and the like. And part of that is driven by some changes within the structure of that, and also that the health agent who attends various things for ongoing training and getting up to speed on changes in regulations and the like is no longer full-time in another municipality where they covered these kinds of expenses. So that has increased a bit, or we're anticipating that that will be increased. The telephone has gone up more than usual because it was the cell phone for our administrator was previously covered by the Region 4AB emergency preparedness structure, and they are no longer going to do that, but it would really be, we'd be hard pressed to function appropriately without our administrator having a cell phone for a number of reasons, including that when there are emergencies and tests of emergency situations, one of the ways that the administrator is notified is via cell phone. And then that triggers sort of a chain of communications with board members and others in town. And that helps demonstrate our ability to communicate during an emergency. So that's part of that expense. The nursing contract, I'll talk about some options on this that we're looking into in just a moment, but we have a public health nurse that we've used the visiting nurse associations for many years. And they track basically infectious diseases and then do various other things. Some clinics, blood pressure clinics is an example of one thing they'll do. They might offer phone call help to people who are dealing with particular illnesses. And even, so we were paying them a lot more during COVID because they have a fixed monthly rate for us. But they were finding that even once the COVID demands went down, that demands were still higher than normal, a little bit in part because of COVID is still here. So they are adjusting their fees to cover that cost. We were paying them, but they're trying to get to that flat fee structure as much as possible. And so they've made a proposal, but again, that's a little bit up in the air for reasons I'll go over. I have highlighted, even though the food inspector, who is actually our food and camp inspector, we have the standard increase. However, when we hired this person, we negotiated a slightly lower hourly rate for them, but said that we would look at, as they acquired more certifications of different types and could perform more functions for us, including for backup to the health agent, that we would look at increasing their salary. And they've just presented more information to us about the extra certifications that they have obtained in the last year. So we need to review that as the Board of Health. We just received that and we're going to be going over that. And so we may seek to bump up their salary to some degree, or their hourly rate. All right, so for the appointed official, which is our Board of Health Administrator, Ellen Hartnett, who has joined in, who is amazing at her job. And she is, as I always say, she is the brains of the operation, and the board tries to be a little bit of muscle here and there to help out. The projection originally for this was to go from 61 up to 64. And if we look at the history, it had kind of ignored this $84,000 year in a way when making that, you know, drawing more of a straight line through it all. However, and people could say, oh, well, this is anomalous because it's COVID era. Again, we're still in COVID era, but the first, so FY22 started in July of 21 and went through June of 22. And by then, the demands on the Board of Health were far less than the first year and a half of COVID, when the administrator was working around the clock on things, as were a lot of the Board of Health members. But for FY 20 and 21, the extra costs were being covered by ARPA funds. So it didn't really show up then, but what happened was the town administrator changed certain employees to being hourly so that they could be compensated for the extra hours of work. So that's partly what you're seeing for FY22. But again, those were still at far fewer hours than had been worked in FY21 for sure. So what the board did was look at, let's say that, let's acknowledge that 35 hours a week is not sufficient for the administrator to get what normally needs to be done. And going to hourly really highlighted what we've known for a long time, is that the administrator puts in a lot more hours than they were, you know, officially signed up for. So we treated it as a 40-hour a week, and then calculate it out from there. And that's where this 73,438 comes from. However, so that's the basics. But as I said, the Board of Health has a lot more work than its current staff, regular staff, which would be the administrator and the this permanent part-time is the administrative assistant. So we knew we needed more hours. We had approached the personnel board to discuss that. And their recommendation was to work with the town's HR consultants to understand what we needed. We fully know the work in front of us. We know that the workload has been going up and up. We have really maxed out all sorts of streamlining and efficiencies and all the rest that can be done, but there just is more work than allotted hours can cover. So let me just bring up another, sorry, wrong document. A moment. So we worked with HR consultants, and I'm going to show you some excerpts from the report that they prepared. So what we asked after going through with them what the duties were of the Board of Health, how time was being spent, what things were hard to take care of, or were requiring extra hours in general, and why it was more than in the past. We ended up also coming to what should the real expenses be for our staff. They did an evaluation. We just wanted to know also cost-wise, where were we falling? I asked them to look at both for the administrator and the administrative assistant I'll just let you read that for a moment. The highlighted part. Okay, so they recognize that it was difficult to do the work within the hours allotted. So this first table is taking a look at what we are paying the administrator versus what's happening in other towns. And you see public health director, and that's essentially what our administrator is. At some point in the past, a decision was made way before my time by a personnel board that the position would be described as an administrator because it was in a different salary category than director. But when the HR consultants, and we've also done this ourselves, the board has, and many boards in the past have looked at the roles of public health directors in other towns and the roles of our administrator, and their equivalent. So director is a more appropriate term for what Ellen does. And the consultants took a look at what current salaries are in other towns. And other towns utilize a range. We don't have one because we've had Ellen for quite some time. But for towns that have changeover in staff, they have a range because, of course, you can have different skill levels and experience levels for the people fulfilling that role. But you can see that Ellen, who is very experienced, very good at what she does, is recognized within the state by the DPH, by other municipalities as being someone who is top-notch. She is at the absolute bottom of the scale here, and they are recommending that we change that. And this change, as if you just scan that, is going to be something on the order of, I'd say, $30,000 plus to get her up to a more appropriate salary, which might be something that we're going to need to do at some point. Anyway, for whoever may come next as well, it would be very unreasonable. You heard about the trouble that Concom is having finding staff, and the salary here just doesn't stand up to what's going on in other towns. So that's one thing. I know based on the earlier conversations, this is not going to make advisory happy, but I think where we've been has been unrealistic. And I'll just briefly go to, this is for the data for administrative assistant. Currently what we're paying, what other towns are paying. I will say that our administrative assistant is also very good, has been doing the job for a dozen or more years, is well acquainted with all the processes, works really well with the people who come in needing help. And so that should also go up to more appropriately compensate. And that's the recommendations of the HR consultants to us. So I'm sure you have questions, and this might be more than can be digested at this time of night and after a long meeting, but I needed to bring this up. Other things, just as you're thinking about that, on the plus side, here's what we're trying to learn about now. The Department of Public Health has instituted a program called the state, oh no, I forget what the A stands for, state something for public health excellence. It's a new program. They're pouring an enormous amount of money into it, tens of millions, close to $100 million, to look at what gaps there are in public health services. And they're organizing municipalities into groups. And it's a little hard to group Dover and Sherborn in with other towns in Eastern Massachusetts, but we have been tentatively grouped with Needham. But Dover is also in that group, and they view us as kind of a subset that might work together. We have started discussions with, or communications, I won't say discussions just yet, communications with Needham on what kinds of services we might be able to get. One of those may or may not be some help with the public health nurse. So when we talk about public health nurses, I do want to remind you that I think most people think of them as people who might give shots or do services that we don't necessarily need in Sherborn because we don't have large underserved populations. However, public health nurses have the credentials to do other work that would offload from the staff, such as running flu clinics. And running flu clinics is important, not just because it's a good thing to have in town for those who might need it, but it also keeps us engaged with the regional emergency preparedness activities. And unless you can demonstrate that you can administer vaccines or other medications on an as-needed basis for pandemics and other kinds of incidents, you can't participate in that. And that would be a real shame to not be part of that group, since I think the pandemic has certainly shown what pulling together can do for towns. So we're going to see if that's an option for us to get more staffing support through this program, but there are various interesting rules connected with it. And so we're not sure yet what would qualify. And so we're exploring that now. We just received the request from Needham to answer all sorts of questions and provide data to them, and then we can move on to the next step. So there might be some funding relief there. And I'll stop. That's, I think, quite a lot to digest. And we've been working on all of these issues for a long time.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks, Daryl. So let's open it up to anyone on advisory with comments, questions for Daryl.
Daryl, I have a question. Peter Galatano. I got my flu and my COVID booster at the drugstore, and I have commercial insurance. Is there any way to partner with the drugstore and offload some of that work? And if there are uninsured, which because of the individual mandate, there shouldn't be in Massachusetts, but there could be, and have the drugstore garner some business and their expertise and professional, that would seem to be a good partnership.
We don't administer all that many vaccines, and we do rely on primary care physicians and pharmacies for delivering a lot of it. It is the institutional experience with running that kind of clinic, because if you've ever had the pleasure of being part of mass casualty or pandemic or other kinds of unusual events, and what is needed to do that, it's about it's a drill essentially, and to demonstrate that the town has the ability to mobilize the resources to carry out something like that. So that is the bigger issue. I'd say Ellen could speak to it. Maybe we did 50 vaccines last year, something like that. Shots?
Yeah, last year we did far fewer than usual, just because we just don't have the time. But we do have to have at least a small flu clinic and actually vaccinate residents once a year. Many towns do multiple flu clinics, but that's a deliverable with the State Emergency Preparedness Region 4AB. And it's a drill of the boards, which is the town's emergency preparedness, emergency dispensing site plan. And if we don't do that, we cannot participate in the region.
And what would it mean to not participate in the region? What would that, what would the implications
we would
be?
lose all of that. They pay for me and possibly the health agent to attend the Massachusetts Health Officers Association training every year, which is, it's 3 days on Cape Cod, and it's 3 full days of classes and trainings. They pay for the hotel, they pay for food, and our attendance at those training education programs. They have monthly meetings where we get together and they have different speakers come, so it's training and getting together with other public health personnel regularly so that we know each other. So if something like the pandemic happens again, we already know each other and we know who to call, who has expertise in what. So it would be a loss, but it's up to the board and the town.
And I'll say, so I've also gone to training, part of which the emergency preparedness portions have been covered in the past for board members. But things like an airplane crashes in your town and how do you respond? That's something that Sherborn could not manage by itself. And that's where being part of that regional collective of resources is really important. And to maintain those lines of communication is important. So a flu clinic is tiny effort to have those other benefits that hopefully we will never need to use. But
Jane, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just looking for a couple of clarifications. So Daryl, I think earlier in the conversation you had mentioned that Ellen's position had been an exempt position, non-hourly based, and had been moved to a non-exempt hourly position. And I guess my first question is whether, I don't know if you know the answer to this, whether council was involved when that decision was made, because, that's not just, there are criteria that have to get applied to that analysis. And I'm just wondering how it came about that exempt suddenly became non-exempt.
I actually didn't know that until very recently, that change had been made. That was a decision by the prior HR director.
So then you don't know.
Unbeknownst to us.
And so is the position now is exempt and salaried again rather than hourly?
No, it is not.
It's still hourly?
Yes.
And are you proposing that it would go back to exempt?
Possibly, although we would like to see more fair compensation, frankly.
So,
and for the number, Ellen worked as many as 32, I think was the top week, 32 extra hours in a week during the height of COVID efforts.
Yeah, and she was paid for that because she became an hourly employee. But my question is, so it seems like we're going back and forth, right? First, it's an exempt position, then it goes to non-exempt and gets paid hourly when she's working the extra hours. And now we're being presented with supposedly comparable positions that are paid much higher. I wonder, are all of those hourly positions? Because it would seem to me that
no, they are not.
Right. So it's apples and oranges. The comparison you're offering is apples and oranges. If this is a non-exempt position, it would not be expected to command the kind of salary that an exempt position would command. So again, it's apples and oranges.
No, but I am not suggesting, I'm not trying to mix them up. And as I said, the reason I included the FY22 and what drove some of our evaluation is just that demonstrates that there are a lot of extra hours that need to be worked. And so someone should be compensated better for that. And right now, we've left it at hourly because the salary is too low, and to continue to ask her to work a lot of extra hours per week is not appropriate. It's also why we're pursuing in parallel, trying to find out what we can do through this public health excellence program from the DPH and the region, the program through Needham to help address the high workload and low number of staff.
Okay, but Daryl, an exempt position, that's what exempt positions are. They don't get paid. They work extra hours and they don't get paid.
I know, and that's why I'm showing you that.
Please, could you let me finish, please? When you go to non-exempt, then you get compensated for your hours, which is where Ellen is right now. But now we're saying that because she's so valuable and this is such an important role, it needs to have a higher salary. It can't be both ways. Either it's an exempt position and it gets paid at a higher rate, or it's non-exempt and it gets paid on an hourly basis. But we are mixing two metaphors. We're mixing.
No, at no time did I say that I expected her to. How would that work? That wouldn't even work. The point of showing you what the HR consultants had to say was to show you what her salary should be. Not an hourly rate. That wasn't an hourly rate.
Have a salary, right? If she's an hourly employee, she has an hourly rate. She doesn't have a salary. That's why
she can go back to being a salaried employee. That change was made. I don't know what rationale the HR director used for that, was not shared with us. As I told you, it went on for over, I don't know how long it went for, a year or more, without the Board of Health being informed that that was a change that was made. So we're fine with going back to the salary.
Yeah, Jane, I think
But I'm
what
just saying that
you have
the
to
salary,
compare
you
is,
need to be aware it needs to go up.
you have to compare the total compensation, because an hourly employee who works overtime gets time and a half. And so I don't think we've seen the total compensation unless that was in the historic figures.
Yeah.
But so yes, it is apples and
FY22
oranges.
reflects time and a half for overtime.
So the 80,000, okay.
So I'm just going to slip in with a couple of quick comments, and we'll go to other people who have their hands up. It does seem strange to me that particularly somebody who is being contemplated as a public health director and running a department would be an hourly employee. I guess I'm curious if there's anybody else in town hall who's a department head who's an hourly employee. I guess I'd also be interested in, if this is an hourly position, if hours go over 40 hours a week, then the expectation would be that there's overtime at time and a half. Is that the way this would work as a hourly position?
Yes. So hold on. We did not intend for her to be, it wasn't in the plan for her to be an hourly employee. She has been salaried for all the years prior to when COVID came on the scene.
Yeah, understood.
Early on, the Board of Health approached the town and said, look, they're for sure, she's working a lot of extra time. And there were others in town who were working more, I believe fire department, police department. I don't know who else in town did, I think DPW. And so the town came up with a way to deal with that, and probably Deb or someone else could address this better. But
I think Diane will in a minute.
Okay, so when I talked to the HR director about it, our former town administrator, I said, how can we institute this? They talked about stipends as an option. I said, well, that doesn't sound right for either the town or the employee, because someone's going to be, it's going to be too high or too low for someone. So we thought it was cleaner to address the actual hours worked.
Yeah.
I told the town, just let us know what we need to do. And, we'll do whatever is being done for the other employees, because they felt that was the right thing to do for all employees in that situation during COVID. And as I said, it's only been in the last couple of months or so that I learned that it had been changed to hourly.
Yeah, Daryl,
and that's not.
Daryl, okay, thanks. I'll mention for what it's worth that on the Form 5 on the second page of the budget document, it lists it as a salaried position. So there's some bit of confusion, I think, about how this position's being handled. Diane, let me come to you, because I think you may have some helpful information for us.
Yeah, so as far as I know, that position falls under the personnel admin plan. And so the only one that really has the authority, I believe, would be personnel that could move a position from salary to hourly. Now, the town administrator may have done that, but which is okay if that's what he wanted to do as HR, but it should have then gone to the personnel board, because it's a change in the job description. And changes in job description have to be approved by the personnel board. And I don't believe that ever came before the personnel board. And I also think that probably the consultant report should be reviewed with the new town administrator we have, and personnel also. And we need to get him involved in this. I think a discussion needs to be had at that level also.
Thanks, Diane.
Could I just mention, is it clear that the Board of Health is not arguing for it to remain an hourly position?
Yeah.
what we're aiming for is appropriate compensation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think the complication is one, just wanting to get the accounting right and understand if something happens and Ellen is working additional hours, either she's exempt and that's just part of the job when that happens, right, or, you know, it's going to be overtime, and what are the budget implications of that? I also think, picking up on Diane's point about getting Jeremy involved and maybe revisiting things with in a broader conversations. I think there also potentially are kind of equity issues across town hall, in that I am certain that there are a number of employees in town hall who would feel as if their salaries have fallen behind where other towns are. And there might, in that sense, you know, in terms of having a broader conversation with Jeremy, may be an opportunity to kind of take some of those factors into account and thinking about this as well. So let me continue with others who have their hands up. Let's see, Natalie and Wasim, I'm not sure who was next. Natalie, why don't we start with you?
Okay, this budget, you're asking to make this employee non-exempt and give them a raise. Is that correct?
You know, the first part of what you said was garbled, so I couldn't quite make it out.
Okay. You're going to change the employee, you're asking to change the employee to be exempt, which we beat to death, and give them a raise.
Yes.
Okay. And personnel, have they weighed in on this?
They sent us to the HR consultants. After we met with them, they recommended that we meet with the HR consultants
and so
that the town had in place for other reasons.
So the personnel board is, whatever the HR consultants told you, the personnel board's happy to just accept that, right? You didn't report back to them and tell them what you found, right?
We just got the final report on the 23rd. So no, I have not been able to do that.
Okay, but you're putting the rate in this budget. If we approve this budget, you know, then we're just going with what this consultant said, and not with our personnel, not what our personnel people have had a chance to review.
Or no,
like
what we have in the. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Finish.
Or like Dan just said, a review from the new town administrator of what's going on in the whole town, right?
I'm happy to do that. The budget that you're seeing right now on the screen is what we presented, but I wanted to let you know that we just received this new HR report that compares compensation in Sherborn versus elsewhere, and by elsewhere, they're not towns that are wildly dissimilar. They tried to pick towns that they felt were appropriate to compare Sherborn with. So right now we have 73,438 for compensation, but yes, we do think it should be higher based on the information we just received, but we haven't vetted that. But since you're advisory, I thought you should know what's on the horizon.
Oh, I thought the 73 was what they recommended. So how did you go from 61 to 73 then?
As I said, we took 40 hours a week at the hourly rate because we can see from FY 22 that she's still working a lot of overtime hours. Maybe we could get that back down to 40, and then we multiplied it out from there. At the rate that would have been, this would be last year's plus, plus the 4%, but then also including the 5 additional hours per week.
Right. Okay, let's go to Wasim.
Yeah, thank you. So quick questions. How many years has Ellen been working for the town? Like just roughly, like it's more than 5?
More than 20 or 25.
Okay. So
37 years, Ellen.
Okay, thank you.
Just
so there was a consultant that did a review of the salaries in town a few years ago. I don't know, Stephen Tsai, maybe you remember. How many years was that? Like 3 years, 4? This was like when I first got. Did that review address this position or did not look at this role?
No one ever came to the Board of Health with any information of that sort, so I don't know the answer to that.
It did not review the Board of Health.
And my last question, if you don't mind, on the report, when they looked at different equivalent roles in equivalent towns, did they also look holistically at the budget? I mean, really what I'm trying to get at is, for example, here we have the Board of Health, the appointed official, but then there's maybe some various agent roles and maybe administrative assistants. So how can we kind of compare the departments holistically as opposed to just the role, right? Is it possible, for example, someone in one of the other towns is just the Board of Health director, but also, doesn't have a part-time administrative assistant, for example, something like that. Like, how do we compare, I guess, apples to apples?
Well, apparently these HR folks are quite experienced working with a lot of different municipalities. I think the town has been happy working with them for, I don't know how long Diane could address that, but they did choose towns that are quite like Sherborn, and they did review, let me just see if I can find where it is. Okay, so you can see some discussion here on what they were doing when they're trying to screen for towns to compare with. They also reviewed the, they did look at the job descriptions that the different towns had and compared it to Sherborn's.
Okay, thanks. Let's keep going, Nora.
Yes, a quick question. So how many hours was that position before? It seems to me that it's still going to be a lot of extra hours. So to me, it would seem that an admin or a part-time person would be the way to go for extra help. If there's still going to be over 40 hours a week, it's still going to be someone who's over.
Yes.
It's hard for me to look at this without saying how many hours per week. So we're assuming 40 hours a week. And if that's still going to be not enough hours, we're still going to be at that problem.
So, all right. Yes, there's been a lot going on this front, and it's quite complicated because it's constantly changing. As I mentioned, because of the Public Health Excellence Program, which we are just starting to get plugged into by the State Department of Public Health. So when we first went to the Personnel Board to discuss anything, it's we were looking to up the hours for the current administrative assistant or get another administrative assistant in. We were ready to do that immediately. We needed it 2, 5, 10 years ago. So we were ready to do that immediately, but we were told to consult with the HR consultants. So that's what we did. That could still be something that we need to do. We've been talking, I think last year we started talking to advisory and others about a public health nurse, but again, people don't realize that that could be someone who fulfills a lot of roles other than what is traditionally associated with a public health nurse. It's just that we need the credentials that a public health nurse has to carry out some of the duties that we would anticipate that person doing, but they could do more. All right, so we'd be willing to add more staff. That's also going to be expensive. Now with this opportunity to do something through Needham, we may be able to get that covered through that other program. But again, They're still formulating it. They have a lot of rules about what is accepted and not for expenditures by a town. And no one's given us clear information yet about that, because we first need to give them a tremendous amount of information about where Sherborn stands.
Thanks, Daryl. So let's see. So it looks like Steve wants to get in. I've got a couple other questions for you, but I would just, I think, kind of summarize where I think we are now. I think you're hearing some concerns about, some questions and concerns about how this fits, whether this is exempt, non-exempt. If it's non-exempt, what happens if there are overtime hours? Some concerns about, I think, kind of equity issues across town hall, and does seem like some additional conversations, picking up on Diane's point, some additional conversations with personnel board and with the town administrator, I think would all be helpful here. Steve, did you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I think I'm probably just going to pick up on the thread that you just laid down there, but I really think that we're getting too deep into the weeds on this topic. This is, in my opinion, advisory's job is not to try to determine what is the most appropriate way to operate and staff a department, and to figure out how to distribute job responsibilities and how much those people should be paid. That is really, that's the entire purpose of the personnel board. And furthermore, I think that the HR director, I think that job responsibility currently still resides with the town administrator. I think it's really their job. I think Jane brings up a good point of whether legal counsel was consulted when changes were made. But I think that ultimately what we should do is just recommend to Daryl that, she follow up with the personnel board, with the town administrator, and possibly with town council, if the TA feels that that is appropriate, to sort out what is the most appropriate way to title Ellen and to staff the department, and ideally have that more finalized when the public hearing comes around. Because obviously she just got this consultant report 2 days ago. So she is not telling us that this is her final budget entry. She's just kind of giving us the information that just rolled in. So I would propose that we table the discussion in terms of what is the most appropriate thing to do with Ellen's position, because that's really a discussion for other people. I do wonder if if the title is going to get changed to public health director. Is that one of those things that can just be a change in the personnel plan, or does that require a town meeting vote to change that position title? So that would just be something more for you to sort out with the TA. If you don't mind, I wanted to ask another couple of questions about the budget that hopefully are easy. Okay. One is with the telephone 3900. Have you discussed with Klaus Ullman and the IT department at all about the possibility of consolidating that into the rest of the town's IT situation? Because I'm sure there's multiple people who have cell phones in town, and that part of your budget perhaps could get subsumed by IT. And then the last question would be, because you guys have a revolving fund and you've mentioned the flu clinic, so do you also have sort of a summary of the flu clinic activity, or sorry, immunization, and what your requested spend limit will be?
So I know that when we got the cell phones for the agent and the food and camp inspector, that I believe we went to IT, but Ellen, maybe you could fill in any details on how that worked out.
Yeah. I do not know. No one has said anything. I know Deb Seifring there was discussion, I think last year, about the phones being taken out of the different departments' budgets and going to IT. I don't know if Deb or Diane know anything more about that. That phone line item is for the Board of Health fax line and the 2 agents' cell phones. And then for the next year, it's adding in my cell phone as well. I mean, if it goes to IT, it wouldn't matter as long as the bill got paid.
I mean, just to pick up on Steve's point, I think the hope had been to consolidate some of these things in the IT budget with the idea that there potentially could be some efficiencies or savings by folding things into a bigger contract. So it seems like it would definitely be worth having a conversation with Klaus Ullman and seeing whether there's something unique about your needs so that this should be kept separate, or whether it should just be a piece of that larger purchase that the town does for phone services. So
I'm gonna. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Daryl, and then we should wrap this up.
Yeah. So I guess the Board of Health has needed additional staff for such a long time, and it's just been. We spent over 9 months just a few years ago just trying to up the hours for the administrative assistant. The option to go from 16 to 19 in a week. That took 9 months at least to get that through. So, and then with IT, I feel like IT should reach out to the departments and help with the phones. It's a lot of work trying to just keep things going, and we know what the needs are, and they're big and they're time consuming. And I know we're a regulatory board, so we're just not a lot of fun. That maybe people don't want to fund it, but I'm flabbergasted at how much effort it takes to get things done, or someone gets changed from salaried to hourly without informing us about what the implications of that are long term. And it's not about you, but as advisory, I'm going to let you know that we're doing the best we can. It's a very hardworking department, and I want to see it supported appropriately. I guess the whole board does.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. I think everybody here appreciates that. I think, as per earlier discussion, everyone here is just trying to think hard about, from taxpayers' perspective, what's the best path forward. And I think, as Steve Tsai summarized, maybe we got a bit deeper into the details here than really where advisory has expertise. Though I think it does reflect, kind of a range of views. And I think bringing this conversation back to the personnel board and the town administrator and sort of getting it situated there to see where things come out and sorting out some of the issues that got raised, I think would be a great way to go. I think it's the best step for moving forward. And I think doing that prior to the public hearing will just make that whole process go much more smoothly.
And I agree. Our plan was to keep working with all the different groups we need to work with. So my intent here was more to tell you things that were on the horizon for the Board of Health. So, I didn't expect the scrutiny of justification for what the Board of Health elected officials have determined is needed to keep it operating properly and serving the people who come into town and need us for things like permits and all the rest. But okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Daryl. Let's wrap it up there. It's getting to a late hour. If you could unshare the screen for us.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Daryl. And I know that got to be a long and involved conversation. Appreciate your taking us through all of that. Okay, so our last bit of business for advisory is to approve minutes. It's late, but I don't think it'll take very long. So I would say let's slog through and do it just so we keep up with that. Give me 1 second here.
Dan, just a comment. When we met
Peter.
in person, these meetings would go till 11:30 at night. So it's interesting that here it is, and I can catch the news, and we're done. But please roll the tape for the. You don't have to comment. I'm just.
No. I have to. That. Of course, I have to comment, and I infer a little regret in your voice that we're not going until 11:30. And I was going to offer. I've got 2 classes I'm teaching tomorrow. And I was going to offer, I could share some of the material I'm going to present to my students tomorrow, if we want to keep things going for a while here. But in lieu of that, let's.
Is it capital allocation? If it has to do with capital allocation, I'm there.
So one bit is a math review for my intermediate macro class, and the other is a 3-hour-long seminar on a whole variety of big picture economic topics, but no capital budget planning tomorrow. Give me a second. Give me a second to screen share here. Okay. I think these are in good shape. Thanks to Natalie again for as she did tonight. As she did tonight, doing this for us. Trying to catch the corner here. Just a second. Having a little trouble with my positioning here. Oh. Okay, in the usual way, I will scroll through. I think these are in good shape, but if you see typos, substantive things we need to fix or adjust, let's take care of it.
There's a typo under liaison reports, police department in the parentheses, getting these last YAR.
Yep, thank you. Good.
Another one, property liability insurance. I think that actually Jeremy presented that one.
Oh, okay.
Is that right?
Deb, is that right?
I don't know.
Yes, he did.
He did. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. I think that was actually my mess up rather than Natalie's and getting that one wrong. Anybody see anything else? And Natalie, you got lost. I'm not sure what happened. And I'll fix the spacing. I'll fix the spacing tomorrow. So if everybody's good, I'd entertain a motion to approve minutes as edited on screen.
So moved.
I moved that. We
second.
Great. All right. Quick roll call. Nora.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Jane.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Wasim.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
And I am aye as well. So we are set on that. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. And our next meeting coming up next Wednesday, we get to get together and do this all again. We'll be talking about recycling, transfer station, town buildings, and DPW. So look forward to that next week. I'll get that posted probably on Friday. And
do we have a budget model loaded with all the budgets at this point, so we can see where the pinata is? And
yeah, we do. I thought I sent that around, but I may.
Oh, I apologize if I.
No. It may be me. The last version I sent around may have been before that. I will. There is a version. I'll send that around.
Great.
Thanks. I will send that around either tonight or tomorrow. Anybody else? Any last things? Then looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, 9:33.
Second.
And roll call, Peter.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Wasim.
Aye.
Jane.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
And I'm I as well. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to everybody who presented. I guess they're mostly off Zoom. So thanks. See you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Good night.
Aye.
Thank you, Dan.